Hi all, welcome to the PSA Administrator section. Before moving towards demo, let me just brief you about the learning. In order to set up and configure PSA for us, we will start with setting up time units required for PSA and we will learn the basics of unit groups and units. Then we will set up the required currency and the exchange rate in the system. This will help us in creating opportunity and codes in various currency formats later in the system. Then we will set up the organization unit and we will learn what is the basic purpose of organization unit in contracting and resourcing. Moving on further, we will set up the invoice frequencies to bill the client automatically in the fixed price and time and material based projects. We will further proceed to set up the transaction and expense categories. Moving on, so the next part is to set up the product and the price list, which are important for the opportunity and code creation. We will also learn the different types of price list, that is sales list and the cost list. Finally, we will be ready to create the opportunity, and this can be created by one of the users. Let's start the journey to set up the PSA. Let's start by setting the time unit first, which is very important for PSA. In this video, we will learn how to set up the basic records to start working on PSA. So let's get started. Let's understand a bit about the units. Units are the quantities or measurements that you sell your products or services. For example, if you sell gardening supplies, you might sell seeds in unit of packets, boxes, and pallets. A unit group is a collection of these different units. In Dynamics 365, you first create a unit group and then create a unit within that group. Please note that the time unit group with the default unit of R is created when a project service automation is installed in the system. You cannot delete, rename, or modify the attributes of the time unit group or the R unit. Attempting to do so might cause unexpected failures in the project service automation business logic. However, you can add other units to the time unit in the group. In the above example, we will set up the unit group as a time and unit under it as a R and day. Let's jump on the CRM to see the demo. Let's click on Settings, Product Catalog, Unit Groups. As we can see, time entry is already created. Let's just open the time entry. Let's see the time unit group. In the time unit group, as we can see, there are two units, R and day. So we can add another unit, which is a week, let's say. So we'll say a week has 5 days, and we'll choose a day as a base unit for the week. This is how we create a unit group and the unit in the CRM. Now we need to configure the currencies and the exchange rate. Microsoft Dynamics 365 is a multi-currency system in which each record can be associated with its own currency. You can perform financial transactions like opportunities, quotes, orders, and invoices in multiple currencies. All entities in CRM have a lookup reference to currency entity. This lookup reference determines the currency in which all the currency type fields should be captured for a record. For example, on opportunity record, we have a lookup to currency entity, that is, we select currency on the opportunity record. So based on selecting the currency on opportunity, all its currency fields like estimated revenue, total amount, discounts are captured. Let's try to set up the currency in the system. Let's click on Setting, Business Management. Let's click on Currencies. There are so many currencies already created in the system. Let's try to create one more. There's a lookup. We can select the currency code from this lookup. Let's try to create real. This lookup automatically populates the currency precision, the currency name, and this. Let's say 1 INR is equals to 17 SAR. Hypothetically, this is the exchange rate we are setting up in the system. Like this, we can have multiple currencies in the system. We can perform transactions in multiple currencies. Now let's try to configure the organization unit. The organization unit plays two roles in the project service automation. First, in the role of contracting unit. The organizational unit represents the division or a group of company that is primarily responsible for winning the sale and managing the delivery of the work and services to the customer. The contracting unit is identified by the field contracting unit under the headers of opportunity code, project contract, and project in project service automation. Second is the resourcing unit. Resourcing unit is the organizational unit that resource belongs to or is assigned to. The organizational unit may provide its resources for certain roles on SOWs and projects owned by the contracting unit. Let's start it by watching the demo. Let's go to the project service. Let's find organization unit. As we can see, there are so many organization units already created in the system. Let's try to create Contoso Africa. Let's say they do billing in US dollars. Let's see if we got. Here we can also attach the cost price list. But in our case, let's go back to the slide and let's understand what's next. Let's set up the transaction categories and the expense categories. It's pretty simple. For expense, each expense categories has a default unit, group, and unit. These values are defaulted on the price list entries for expense categories. The cost of travel and other expenses that are incurred by a project consultant usually are billed to the customer. Project Service Automation supports pricing of expense categories by using price list. Each price list line for expense specifies pricing for a specific expense category. For example, airfare, hotel, and car rentals are examples of expense categories. For pricing expense categories, Project Service Automation supports the following three types of pricing method. One is it is at the cost. The cost of the expense incurred is the amount that the customer is billed. Second is a markup percentage. The customer is billed for a certain set percentage over an actual cost incurred for that expense category. Price per unit. A billing price is set per each unit of the expense category. The amount to bill the customer is calculated based on the number of units of the expense that the consultant reports. For example, mileage is an example of price per unit billing. The mileage expense category can be configured for $30 per day or $2 per mile. When the consultant reports mileage on the project, the system calculates the amount to bill based on the number of miles reported by the consultant. Let's have a look in CRM. Let's see what is there present in the transaction categories. Let's try to open the mileage. We'll have to mark here it as a chargeable. Here we are allowed to select the unit group as well or the default unit of it. Let's see an example of expense category. In this case, let's try to open the conference. It says this is expense category is of type expense conference and it has an expense category of conference and receipt required is optional or mandatory. We can mark this here as well. So this is fairly simple and which its use we will explain later when we are trying to create the opportunity. Now we need to set up the price list and the product. A project price list has a different price override pattern that a product price list is on the project codes and contract. On a product catalog based code line, you can override price directly on the code line because each code line points to exactly one catalog item. On a project-based code line, you cannot override price to roles and categories directly on the code line. To support the two distinct patterns of overriding, a new price list association, the project price list, is introduced with the project service automation. As we can see, this is a typical example of a price list. Let's look at in the CRM. Let's go to the settings. Let's say project list, service. Let's open the price list. As we can see, there are two price lists. One is a bill rate, another is a cost rate. So bill rate is an amount which is billed to the customer, whereas cost rate is the amount which is an actual cost of our resources. So in this example, it is a sales price list for the customer, and the currency will be euro, and it is calculated as per hour. So an architect of any resourcing unit per hour will cost 142 euro. Whereas if an architect is from Contoso France unit, it will cost 151 euro. Whereas architect from Contoso India will cost 85 euros. So we can set the role prices. Now we can set the category prices as well. In this case, airfare is priced at 0, since we'll have to calculate it on the basis of actual cost. Let's see a price list items. Here we have included the product as well. Let's try to open a product. This is a price list item which has a lookup to a product and a unit with which it will be solved. It will be the product signifies that it is a CRM 3-year basic license which will cost 1,440 euros. So this is an example of a product and price list and the price list item where we can set the role prices, category prices, and the price list items. Now, next topic is to set up the resources. Now, setting up the resources takes little more time as it is a complex process. It has series of steps associated with it. Let's start. First step is that we'll have to create a resource skill. Your client's project no doubt require a variety of different skills to complete the job, such as SQL programming or agile methodologies. Enter each skill so you can associate it with the resource role. This is a typical example of a resource skill. Let me just show you this in CRM. Let's open the resource skill. So this is a typical example of a resource skill. Let's try to create one skill, which is, let's name it as simple skill. Simple. It requires approval or not. Let's say not for the sake of simplicity. Let's save it. Next is a proficiency model. We'll have to define the proficiency model. Proficiency model is a way with which we can classify the skills. For example, familiar, good, or proficient. So let's have a look at this in CRM. This is a proficiency model. Let's open the skill model, where we have the minimum value and the maximum value rating. We can change it for. Now we need to enter the label here. Let's say bad, good, very good, and let's say excellent. So like this, we can create multiple ratings so that can be used in a skill. Now we need to set up the resource roles. Resource role is like a role which can be assigned to a skill. That is, for example, an architect. We can set the target utilization rate for each role, and these settings determine resource availability and utilization when you are staffing projects and analyzing actuals. Let's have a look in CRM. Let's create one sample role. Let's say target utilization is 40. Billing type should be chargeable. the sample, we have created a resource role. Now we have to map skill with the resource role. Let's do that. We created a sample skill. So with the sample role, we will attach this sample skill and let's have a proficiency at bad. Let's save it. Since this is a bad example of a role and skill, now we need to add the resources. Now resource can include users, contacts, accounts, group, or equipment. Anything that you might want to include in your project, scheduling and invoicing. You can assign resources to organizational units if you need to have different costing and pricing for resources for different division in your company. Let's have a look at the CRM. Let's add a resource. Let's say it is a equipment. It is a building. 1. Let's save it. Next step is to associate skill with the resource. Let's do it. Let's add a resource skill. Let's say he has a sample skill with a rating bad and the resource name is building 1. We can add the resource role as well, that this resource can act with a multiple role. Let's have a sample role. Now we have to create the work hour templates. We can create project schedules. You need to set up a project calendar that defines the number of working hours to accommodate per day in the schedule and any business closures. You can do this with a work hour template, which contains details about work hours per day, days off, and other business closures. When you're creating a project, you associate a work template to a project calendar to apply the schedule for a project. There are two ways you can create a work hour template. First is create a work hour template based on the resource calendar, or second, create a new work hour template. Let's have a look in the CRM. Let's open work hour template. This is my default work hour template, which says it is 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We can select the template resource. Let's apply calendar to a resource. Let's just do it in the CRM. Let's go to the resource. Let's select the resource. We can set the calendar. This will give me a pop-up. I can set the default work template and apply on it. Next, you need to set up as an additional project parameter to use for a project. When you first install the Microsoft Dynamics 365 for project service automation, we created a parameter setting to first create all the records required for a Microsoft Dynamics 365 for project service automation. Now it's time to go back and configure additional fields for this parameter setting. We will need to configure the organizational unit, invoice frequencies, work hour template, price list. In this step, you will also indicate what type of resource allocation you want. First is the central. Second is a hybrid. Central, in only the resource manager can allocate the resources to a project. Whereas in hybrid, resource managers, project manager, and account manager can allocate the resources to a project. Let's open the parameter in CRM. This is a default parameter which got created. Let's open this. It has a description parameter, which is a hybrid resource allocation. It has a price list associated with it, the project role, team member role. We have the default billing frequency, which needs to be set up. This is my default organization ID. I can change this as well. Let's say if I want, I can change it to Contoso US. So far, we have seen that in a step 1, we have set up the basic records to run the PSA application. And in step 2, we'll see that we'll create a lead and qualify it to opportunity. And in step 3, we can create a project based on the code provided to the customer or either using a template. So far, we have learned how to create the basic set of records so that we can create opportunity, codes, and projects. These setting records are solely managed by PSA admin.